So I've been meaning to show you this, Brian. I collect cards, right?
I do.
Athletic cards. But I pulled this. I went to, I think it was on Target, and they had these like jumbo packs, like 30 cards, but they're soccer cards. And I was like, what the hell? Why not? So I bought them, and I pulled probably the two best things you can get out of it. This Messi card, which is kind of like a holo. Yeah, it's kind of a special holo. It's got like a special coating on it. Or they call them prisms. I don't know if I can show it right there. But it's a limited edition. I mean, I don't know how.
This was just in a random pack of cards.
Random pack, but it's not just this. But I also got, I don't know, you know who Trinity Rodman is?
No.
That's Dennis Rodman's daughter. She's on the USA soccer team, the women's soccer team, but she's a stud.
The one that lost in the World Cup?
Yeah. Not, but but I pulled these both, and this also is a prism as well. So yeah. So I thought
it's pretty good find for a Target pack.
Yeah, for like $6.99. So I'm gonna send these in to get graded, and I think someone said like this Messi, if I get it graded with a 10, it'll I mean, it could be like a $200-$300 card.
Is this where I'm supposed to show the cards that I have? Is
Yeah,
that what you're setting me up for?
What? No, not at all. So what cards have you gotten recently?
Only one.
One card? What card is that?
This Alex Kazan mint trading cards card.
Oh, yeah. The limited edition one.
Yeah, we actually, this one we made prior to this year's games. Obviously, it's after the games now. So it won't list any of our accolades from this year. But I thought in some ways that was kind of cool, actually, to kind of have a card before, to come to the games and finish 24th is great. Mm-hmm. To come a second year and finish 5th is phenomenal. But we decided and worked with her to make this card prior to that. So it doesn't have her 2023 season stats on it, but it is I think a great card. Doing her favorite or best movement, probably the Granite Games last year.
That's an amazing picture.
Oh, you do know the guy who took it?
Yeah, I think I know him. No. Speaking of the cards, we're actually just we're partnering up with Mint. Mint, we'll try to explain it. Wad Zombie, who makes the cards, he enjoys doing so much, and everything he does from the cards, he gives back to the athletes. So Alex Kazan is one of the athletes that he decided to make a card for. And people don't know Alex; she's just a great person. And it's a team of us, actually. It's Nick from Wad Zombie, who pretty much finances all of it. Tyler, who does a lot of the design and some of the statistical stuff. You provide the actual bios or the print, or I guess whatever the writing for the cards. And then it's either myself or I reach out to other photographers to provide the images. So it's a pretty cool collaboration. I really enjoy it. But Nick really enjoys the cards. He knows the athletes really do. He loves giving back to the athletes. So what he started to do is he branched off. It's part of Wad Zombie, but it's called Mint. Mint trading cards. And let's see if I can bring up that website. He also does you got stickers too?
Yeah, the new Mint stickers. Let's see here. I haven't even opened this yet.
See what the stickers look like.
Here's the Mint trading card sticker. It's pretty nice.
Sticker, yeah, that is nice.
There's a few in here. I don't even know what they all are, actually. I guess there's 2 of these. He always likes to throw in a old school Wad Zombie one. I don't know how many of those I have now. And then he's got some new logos, I guess, of his stuff. I haven't seen all of these before. And he's throwing someone named Pukey in for the presidential race next year. Okay.
Why not? So yeah, if you look up Mint trading cards, this is his trading card business. And as you can see, the Alex Kazan's for sale, brand new, just came out. He still has the Ben Smith, one of my favorite ones too. I like the foil on that, and it's a little bit more expensive because of the foiling. It's a limited edition, limited print. the works actually. The roster of athletes that he's getting in terms of producing cards is pretty impressive. I'm really excited to see which ones come out next.
Yeah,
But we are doing a contest, a giveaway.
A few coming down the pipeline, I think.
Yeah, a couple. But we're actually. I talked to Nick last night, and I think on our last podcast, I said I wanted to kind of do giveaways in every show. And oops, sorry, what we I don't know, just talking to you yesterday because you literally got those cards yesterday, and I reached out to Nick. I'm like, hey, it'd be kind of cool to give away one of those cards. So some of our subscribers, followers, kind of do a giveaway, and he was down. So with our partnership with Nick, we are giving away one of these limited edition cards, the Alex Kazan cards. Pretty easy to enter. You just gotta like the post that we have on our B.Friendly page, our Instagram page. Follow Mint Trading Cards, Alex Kazan, and B.Friendly Fitness on Instagram. Most of you guys are watching us, already following us. All you have to do is follow Mint Trading Cards and Alex Kazan, and tag a friend because each tag's worth entry. It opened yesterday, actually. The giveaway opened yesterday, and closes Thursday. Yeah, Thursday, and we'll announce the winner on Friday. So here's the rules, stuff like that. So we already had a couple people. Keeper, I don't know if that counts. Does that count as a? Does that count? I don't know. I guess he tagged a friend, right? Wad Zombie.
Kiefer has to buy one for sure.
Yeah, Kiefer definitely has to buy one. And we got a couple other ones on there. So, like I said, doesn't cost anything. All it costs is your support, which is supporting people like Nick and Alex. That's the main things. Again, Nick's all about supporting athletes, as are we. But everything all the money that's raised through the selling of the cards goes directly back to Alex. So it's not a big chunk of change, but but it's enough. It's a great thing. And again, we have the goal is we have Nick, and I've had conversations with Nick, and we have big aspirations for the trading card business in CrossFit, especially since I collect cards. Yes, I'm a 47-year-old man that collects cards, but you know what? I don't care. We all have our vices, I guess. But
not a bad vice to have.
No, it's not.
I've heard of worse ones.
Yeah, I mean, I have other ones, but I don't know how bad they are. But but okay, but that's about it. So yeah, support Alex, support Nick at Mint Trading Cards. Enter the contest. You get a free card out of it, and who knows, maybe the next event. I saw a lot of people. I think Wex from Wex Appeal. He brought all his trading cards to the games and had them all signed. It was pretty cool.
I wrote on here was Kazan's breakthrough performance in winning the North America West semifinal put her into all kinds of conversation in terms of top end potential of the 2023 CrossFit Games, and turned out to be pretty damn good.
Wow, that's some great analysis, Brian. It's almost like you know what you're talking about.
Well, I didn't pick her to have a top end performance, but I'm happy that she did.
Exactly. But let's talk about the well, we recapped the games our last episode, but which way?
Well, I would say what we really recapped was kind of the athlete's performance at the games.
Yeah.
It was a long show, it was nearly 3 hours long, and we didn't get really the chance to talk about the totality of the season or the games itself and some of the kind of details, questions, controversies, cool things that happened at the games or this year in general. So today, instead of focusing so much on the athletes, I wanted to kind of big picture, what was the 2023 game season like? Now that we can look back at all of it, there are a lot of people that I think get caught up in the middle of the season and they want to talk about the whole season, but it hasn't happened yet. Now it's happened. We've had the open run all the way through the games. We can, a couple of weeks to reflect and look back. And obviously there's a great deal of excitement about things for the future, what the game season is going to look like, where it's going to be. But I think to help put that in context is to say, okay, well, what just happened? And based on what we know and experienced, what's kind of maybe likely to happen, or what can we expect or hope to see because of what we just saw?
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's the best way to explain what we did last week and what we're trying to do now. But for those who haven't listened or watched last week's, it's a great listen. I would highly suggest, if you don't have time to watch it, download it on any of our podcasts. We are available on Apple, Spotify. Download it there. Again, it's almost 3 hours, but it's a quick 3 hours. I don't know. It didn't seem like 3 hours to me.
No, we don't waste any time talking about trading cards that we bought at Target on that show.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Fair enough. Good. Okay. All right. So I think that's a hint to tell me to keep on going. All right. So I guess the best way to talk about the 2023 season is to just maybe start with what was most recent, which was the games. And instead of, again, talking about the athletes, talk about some of the program. Was there a particular, I guess, test that kind of stood out that either was, you thought was perfect or wasn't a good test in your opinion?
Well, I think there are kind of some big picture things that are worth addressing when it comes to the programming this year, and then we can dive in a little bit from there. If you haven't already listened to JR and Taylor on Shut Up and Scribble and Chase and Bill on Get With the Programming, they take some kind of different approaches to evaluating the programming from the games. Bill and Chase have been doing this for a long time, and they have the same format that they often do and have always done with games, regional, semifinals, etc. over the years. And that'll give you kind of a big picture. Was the programming balanced? And I think that it's worth a listen if you have any doubts about that, because there were a lot of kind of critiques this year, maybe just first glance thinking there's a lot of pulling compared to pressing this year at the games. And I think that is a big picture topic that they'll break it down for you and show you whether that was the case or not, and compare it to, some other years. And I think that it's important for people to understand that year to year, the structure of the test at the CrossFit Games is like more often than not, and I would say almost every year from beginning to end, if you just look at the test, it's a well balanced and complete test. Usually the problems show up within the cuts and the scoring. And once again, this year we had cuts and scoring, and I think that there were kind of two areas there that CrossFit kind of put themselves in a tough situation, and it started with their workout announcements. So at the onset of their workout announcements, they put this Venn diagram up on Instagram. And if you want to, I'm talking to pull it up for people to remember, you certainly can, but they showed the intersection of monostructural weightlifting and gymnastics circles, and then showed this CrossFit in the middle. Well, the first thing they announced was Helen, which is a MWG workout. We had a version of Helen at the games. Then they announced, I think, the cross-country 5K run, and they filled in that part of the Venn diagram. Then they announced the Olympic weightlifting total, and they filled in that part of the Venn diagram. And as they were doing this, the workouts were populating on the game site on Saturday. They're going to run Saturday. They're going to lift Saturday. And it just made sense and seemed logical that they would also have what they were advertising as a gymnastic skills test on Saturday. And that if those were, in fact, the only 3 tests on that day, that because that day fell in between the first and second cut, that would probably be something that people would be receptive towards in terms of a day of testing to further continue the test, but also have a well-balanced intersection of programming to, justify another round of cuts. I don't know why they decided to do that and set themselves up for what seemed so obvious and what it seemed like people were pretty excited for, and then go a different direction, which is introduce a skills test that was, in many ways different than the other 2 tests they'd announced. The other 2 tests were very straightforward and well known, and it was going to happen on Saturday. And then this gymnastics test was wildly unknown, including its location and placement, and ended up happening earlier in the competition. So I think that they had a good intention with that post, but the follow through or execution of it really left a lot of people scratching their heads. And so that was kind of like my first pause for concern about the way that this games was going to play out, because of the impact that we know scoring changes and cuts can have on the ultimate result.
Do you think that was something that maybe was a last minute decision? Like, obviously there's been much said about how involved Dave was when he took over as, I guess, the new general manager of sport. Do you think that might have had an influence in some of those what we might think might have been changed?
That's really difficult to know. I think
Yeah.
there's another big picture question for this year's games was, whose programming was this? And while Dave
Hmm.
seemed to make it and seemed to say a couple times, that Adrian's still doing the programming, there's no doubt about the fact that he had influence on things that happened in the build up to and during the CrossFit Games. And the question that a lot of people are asking is how much and in what areas was he having that influence? And I think in some ways it's, people are frustrated by not knowing that because they like my, our friend JR Howell, for example, he likes to study the
Hmm.
programming, study the programmer's mind, get inside of there and have some clues. And I think that he was looking forward to, as many people were, seeing another year of Adrian's programming and maybe a third year. And by the time we have 3 seasons of Adrian Bosman, we can start to kind of thread a needle and understand his mind as a programmer a little bit more. Now we have this year where it's not entirely clear if this was all Adrian or if it was Adrian and Dave and how much Dave might have had an
Hmm.
influence on it. And I would say that while that might be frustrating for certain people who really were looking forward to seeing the evolution of Adrian's programming on its own, that on the other hand, maybe it's not that bad to not necessarily know how that
Hmm.
relationship works between Adrian and Dave. I think that, to your question, if Adrian did have a plan, let's say that he wanted to have that gymnastics test on Saturday and that ended up changing for whatever reason, then that presentation of how he was going to lay out the workout and the workout announcements became a little convoluted. But you found it.
I did. Sorry.
I know they probably have so many
It's
posts
way at
over
the
the last
bottom.
month. Yeah. And I didn't prep you for that, but
That's
I do think that there are some elements of not knowing how Dave and Adrian are working together that are kind of nice, in the same way that Dave addressed with the swim, of not having to swim, not being predictable, not feeling like he has to, not having pressure to feel like, as CrossFit, they have to put a swim every year just because it's an expectation.
Mhm.
I think it's also okay to not necessarily know who's doing the totality of the programming or where the balance is or where it's coming from. And my at a more macro level, I think that just from doing it myself, when one person programs a competition, it can be very good. But when you get a couple minds together that trust each other and are willing to have like a, challenging but constructive conversation, that it can oftentimes be better. And so maybe there's and by the way, don't forget that Dave and Adrian have done this a lot. Like,
Mhm.
Adrian has been intimately involved in the programming world when it comes to the CrossFit Games for, damn near since the beginning. I would say maybe 2008 or 9. He was already in those rooms as those conversations were happening to some degree. So, there's no lack of experience there. But I think that the time frame and Dave being inserted into that equation late in the game relative to this, the amount of time that was remaining before the game started, may have, caused some things to maybe not be as smooth or well thought out as they might have been otherwise, or they would likely be next year.
Steven brings up a good point here. I think the ESPN broadcast slots made a difference in event layout.
Absolutely. And I think Dave addressed that in one of his weekend reviews. Someone asked
Mhm.
that question specifically of him, and he said, yes, we put a lot of thought into that. And I actually know that they did, that they reached out to some different groups of people to kind of get some feedback, because there has been criticism over the years about what they've chosen to show there. Last year they had the crossover double unders. The year before that, they had the freestanding handstand push-ups, which was, kind of new things for the athletes and maybe not
2020. Yeah,
kettlebell
the one
lunge
that
toes
sticks
to
out to
bar.
me. Yeah, that was the one that sticks out in 2020. Is like, of all, I mean, the ranch was I thought the ranch could have been so fun to broadcast because it's a limited field. There were only 5 men, 5 women. They had some classic CrossFit workouts. It was at the ranch, and the one workout they chose was that one where you had CrossFit athletes slipping on wet grass, and it wasn't. I don't know. It was just, yeah, it was just two movements, and it wasn't like really cool CrossFit movements, I guess. But
And I would,
uh,
and so anyway, in terms of
yeah,
Saturday, I think they were
yeah,
always planning to feature the lift as the Saturday night event on ESPN. And I think that
mhm,
Friday night, which was the main ESPN slot, was Helena.
yeah, yeah.
And those things made to me make perfect sense. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I think I mentioned in our last show that my brother watched both of those. He doesn't watch a
Yeah.
ton of CrossFit. He knows about it because of me, but he turned on ESPN and was watching those things, and he was captivated by it. He enjoyed watching it. And lifting is, in that format is pretty fun. I would say it's more fun to watch that than an Olympic lifting meet because there's more things happening more often. There's still
Mm-hmm.
big weights going up. And obviously Helen is a fun race to watch, and the way that we were able to cover it with the drone, especially in and out of the Coliseum, was
Yeah, that was cool.
it was probably really, really, really fun to watch. So, and I did, as ironically Fit says there, I did get a lot of feedback that the watching of the events at home was good this year, and that makes me really happy because that's the area of the CrossFit Games that I'm most involved in, is trying to make sure that the product that's being put on display for the people on site and people at home especially is as good and digestible as possible. And then at the bottom there, he gets to event
Yeah.
number one.
Yeah. So let's talk about event one, number one. I mean, I think that seems to be a lot of the talk after the games is like, about the crashes, about the coverage, and event one, number one overall. I mean, what were your overall thoughts about number one in terms of it being a test? Is it necessary, just kind of like the swim, to have a biking event? I mean, from a business aspect, I think from a marketing and business aspect, it makes sense. But if you aren't going to have a swim, then a bike, why not? But your overall thoughts about event number one?
I think test one is probably my biggest area of concern for the CrossFit Games this year,
Mhm.
and it's developing into a pattern that I am starting to have some questions about. And again, Dave was asked in his weekend review about injuries during CrossFit Games. This was specifically with regard to Roman. And
Mhm.
I thought he addressed it really well. And he said like 40 people did that test. One of them hurt themselves going over the last line and landed on a sandbag. We briefed the athletes to be exceptionally careful about that, but it's sports, and it's like sometimes that happens. And
Mhm.
he referenced Jamie Simmons' elbow and Olympic lifting Brooke Wells from the year before. The bikes at the CrossFit Games, if you just think historically about a road bike or not a machine bike at the CrossFit Games, it goes all the way back to Pendleton 1 and 2. And those are one speed bikes and whatever, but the group was spread out and everyone's mostly traveling in a linear path. There weren't obstacles, there weren't tight turns, there weren't these mass starts, there weren't these racing environments that are potentially dangerous, especially when you're dealing with a huge variability of athletes' proficiency on a bike. And then we didn't have road bikes at the games for many years after that. And then in Madison, they started showing up again. And we had cyclocross in 2017. We had the crit in 2018. At 2020 games, we had the bike repeater. And then last year we had bike to work. This year we had ride. So now the road bike has become something that CrossFit Games athletes should clearly be preparing for and hopefully confident in doing. But in many of those circumstances, it's a race, and to me, I'm not sure that that's the best way to be putting a road bike into the games. And I do know, like, there are athletes, like I think Laura Horvath said in the post games interview, which if you haven't seen it, you can check out the whole thing on our YouTube channel. That the crit race in 2018, her rookie year, her first event, was one of her favorite events that she ever did at the CrossFit Games.
Mhm.
Well, she's pretty good at riding a bike. She didn't have any accidents. She didn't have any inexperienced bikers crash into her. If any of those things were the case, I don't think that would have been her favorite event. And if you're not good at a bike, that's one thing. But if you have someone else who's not good at biking, who doesn't know what they're doing, who gets in your way, or the bike malfunctions, whatever, it's
Yeah.
then she might have had that same feeling about it. And you even listen to people like Yona Koski or Jeff Adler, their reviews of these competitions, they'll say, I'm just glad I didn't get caught up in any of the crashes, or I didn't get caught up in
Mhm.
any of the chaos. And then you, on the flip side of that, you have someone like Emma Carey, or you have someone like Lazar Jukic, or, and I don't know what happened, as a lot of people don't know what happened exactly in those situations. But from my perspective, bike crashes, or I'm not even sure, but something unfortunate happened. And as a result of that, that test did not accurately represent their fitness. And now some
No.
people might say, no, fitness is being able to navigate the field and all these other things. And I would say, okay, maybe. But in the case of Emma Carey, like, from what I can tell, and I think someone said that they did show it at some point, she went down on the first turn, whether it was her fault or someone else's fault. And by the time she got back up, there was nothing really she could do. Like, she was so far behind, and you just had to ride your bike for 40 minutes. It was hard no matter what. And take a zero. So she's still in a hole physically. She's also in a massive hole in terms of competition. She got 0 points on that test. So she basically had 11 opportunities instead of 12, and she still ends up in the top 10 overall. And that's just like, I don't know how good she would have done if the bike race was just in an environment where I actually got to see her execute from a fitness perspective over the course of that time period. And if she gains, the margins are pretty tight. If you gain 40 points instead of 0, you move up a couple spots, the money changes, maybe the sponsorships, the deals change, or the incentives, and I don't know, it can have a big impact. And I think that there's a little bit of a chance that CrossFit's falling into a trap when it comes to the bike at the games, of putting it into this racing setting and set it into a competitive fitness setting. So for me, bike repeater in 2020 was like the best version of the bike at the games. You're not, you're going out and down in your lane, you come back, you climb a rope. And it's like, this was a very, we could see who was good on the bikes, and it wasn't the results weren't impacted by someone else crashing into you or whatever else might have happened in this event.
Yeah. Do you know if there's any minimum requirements on the bike? Like, what stopped Emma from basically, she's getting a 0 regardless. Did she have to finish the 40 minutes, or could she have just left the course at any point after that and still not threaten her rest of her games?
My understanding was for this year's CrossFit Games, there were no minimum work requirements for any workout. And I think that this is basically a derivative of what happened with Alexander Caron at the Northeast semifinal this year. Okay. However, all of the athletes were expected to give a full effort for the totality of the workout. And that's obviously leaves some room for interpretation, which can get a little bit dicey. But in this case, if she would have said, well, I'll just take the 0 and walked off the course, I think they would have removed her from the competition altogether. Correct. But because she stayed on the bike and rode around for 40 minutes, she can take the 0 points and still continue in the competition, which is obviously what happened. The other thing about this test is, and I know that people have had complaints and concerns about this in the past, is that there was a variable amount of work that was done. It was listed as a 40-minute AMRAP, but the people didn't stop working at 40 minutes. At 40 minutes, the gate closed and everyone had to finish their lap. And, I'm pretty sure if you go on the games leaderboard that there's no time for I think it just says reps. Yeah. It just says you did 7 reps, you did 6 reps. I think maybe 1 or 2 of the girls did 5 reps. But there's no, like, the scoring there is really strange. There's no chance for me to look at that and understand. Like, if you didn't know what you're looking at, you go to the leaderboard, you say, oh, Jeff Adler, 2nd place, 7 reps. Vellner, 27th place, also 7 reps. What seems to be a problem. And this happens at the CrossFit Games all the time, where there's information that the CrossFit Games keeps as, like, I don't know if they're keeping it for proprietary reasons or if they're just not thinking about the fact that people want to see it. But I want to know, why did they each get 7 reps, but Adler finished 25 spots ahead of him? And now we of course know the answer, but if I look back at 5-10 years from now and I'm trying to evaluate this, it's, unless you were there or, have some kind of weird, great memory about it or access to someone who does, you're not going to know what was going on. Like, why aren't the times included there? And if the times were included there, what you would see is that some athletes rode the bike for 40 minutes and change, and others were riding them for 44, 5, 6, 7 minutes and change because they made it through the gate. So they had to do another lap, especially when you think about what happened in the second event, which was the pig chipper. I mean, if you read almost any athlete's write up or review of that event, they're talking about their legs cramping up. Yep. And now you have people that are doing, an extra lap, which is the most intense lap, 5-6 extra minutes of riding hard and racing for the biggest point separations. Compared to the, half the field that didn't have to do that. In the women's case, it was like 3/4 of the women's field that didn't have to do that extra lap. And I don't know why why couldn't you just make this 6 laps for time?
Yeah.
And just say it's a race and you got 6 laps and you're going to get it done. And we're not capping anyone. Everyone has to finish it. We have another test coming up. And the longer you spend out there, the less recovery you have to the next one. I'm okay with that. The way that they had it, I think to me, and we even talked about it last week. I mean, there must have been half a dozen times that you asked me about an athlete, and in talking about the athlete, I said, "Look, I'm not even worried about test one. Like, to me, test one is irrelevant in terms of assessing an athlete's fitness. And like when I look back at the games, it's the last thing that I'm worrying about. Obviously, it was difficult, but I think that the way that it was designed, and in general, the way that the CrossFit Games has started to bias the inclusion of the road bikes, is missing the mark more often than not."
Yeah. Every time I think about the bike, I think about the 2017 season. And I think about Chelsea Hughes, who crashed her only time. I believe that's the only time she ever made it to the games. First event, she crashes. I think she broke her collarbone or something like that, and she was done. I also think of Brooke Wells, because I remember Brooke Wells during the warm up for that, the time trial, she crashed. And then I remember talking to Sydney at the games this year, and she brought up, like, during they didn't have a time trial, but during the warm up, she crashed the same way. And it seemed like just about all the athletes I talked to had some type of spill during the warm up or the bike fitting or whatever you want to call it the day before. But yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate that's the memory I have of bikes. When you think of the bike event, you don't have a memory of Emma Lawson winning the event, or Koski winning the event. Your memory is the crashes and who suffered from the crash.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's twofold. And actually, the worst case was Michelle Fumagalli, rookie in 2018 at the games. I think she broke both of the arms in her forearm, or both of the bones in her forearm in the race, in the competition that year. And look, I do remember Adrian Moonweiler winning the crit, and I do remember Ricky Garrard winning the cyclocross, and I do remember Joanna Koski winning this race. Like, you still do get good races out of it, and certainly athletes that are proficient on the bike are rewarded for it. But I think that there are safer and better environments to test that skill of riding a bike, or that physical feat of riding a bike, than the CrossFit Games has more often than not included as part of its programming. So to me, this year, that was probably, or maybe definitely, the biggest miss in the programming at the games.
Yeah. Well, Barkley brings up a good point here. The years of the bike align with being in Madison and Trek being in Wisconsin with the move. Could we see the bike disappear for a different state-specific implement?
And to be clear, I don't think that road biking needs to be removed from the CrossFit Games. I think it's great to test it at the games, and in a lot of the same ways that swimming's easier to test there, that odd object stuff or running long distance outside, in trails, whatever is reserved more often than not for the CrossFit Games. Road biking certainly can be also, but if possible, I would prefer to see it in an environment that eliminates things that in my opinion, have nothing to do with fitness from being factors that determine how athletes end up doing, not just on that test, but in some cases for the rest of the CrossFit Games. Obviously a few athletes have had to bow out because of injury as a result of that, and others have, I just don't think the results are always, in this case especially, are really necessarily representative of all of the athletes' potential to ride a bike or a road bike.
You mentioned injuries, and you mentioned Jamie Simmons, and this is something we briefly talked about on our recap show. But I want to kind of get your opinion a little bit more on this in terms of Jamie. Finished, she made the cut. She hurt her elbow, I believe, during the lift, and ended up withdrawing the next morning, and then didn't backfill the cut because it was too late to bring in the next person, which would have been Kelly Baker. I mean, any more thoughts on the whole Jamie Simmons? And also, you brought up, I think, last time in terms of points and where she ended up placing. Thoughts on that.
There are two things that I've been attempting to get an answer from CrossFit on, and so far haven't, and that is the Rookie of the Year decision, which we talked about. I don't really understand why the person who was a rookie and had the best overall placement, same number of event wins as the other candidate, didn't win the Rookie of the Year. It doesn't make any sense to me. And secondarily, when it comes to Jamie Simmons, I'm a massive Jamie Simmons fan, by the way. Picked her to finish 10th this year, and I think she was on track to do pretty close to that, which was pretty cool. She had to withdraw. I think that Dave also addressed this, that the timing of when she chose to withdraw, and I think it was well within her rights and made sense to wait till the morning because you just don't know how that elbow is going to feel. didn't really give them a good opportunity to extend that backfill like they did in the case of Ellie Turner the day before when she withdrew in the evening. I think that they handled both of those things just fine. What's really confusing to me is why she's listed as 17th on the game's website when she withdrew from the competition. In years past, Brooke Wells being a great example of that, she drops to 20. I think Brooke's points in 2021 would have still got her like 13th place overall. And the really the big problem I have with that, and the confusing thing is, if that's the case, why did Roman have to go out there and compete at all in test 11 and 12? He could have just said, no, my foot's broken, I'll take 2 zeros. Jamie was just taking zeros and she wasn't getting penalized on the leaderboard. There's no reason that he needed to go out there and risk hurting his other foot doing 133 heavy jump rope single or double unders. And, because he wasn't going to get any points anyway, and they weren't going to penalize him on the placement, apparently, for not doing that. So there was a massive inconsistency there between what happened with Jamie and what happened with Brooke 2 years ago and what happened with Roman. And those are the kind of the big picture things that I'm alluding to, that reinserting Dave into the equation really late on is, I think just like created a possibility for some of those things to happen that might not have happened otherwise.
Yeah, and it also affects prize money. I mean, like you brought up with Brooke, like she finished, she was given a 20th place, but the amount of points she had would have placed her 13th. That's a big chunk of change. I mean, I have to look at it, but it could be upwards of $10,000, difference in that. And
just look there. Stop there in the top 10. Look at Emma Carey's points. 700 and what she had, 31 points. And she didn't do test 1, basically. I mean, she didn't get any points from that test. Only 57 points away from 4th place.
Yeah,
like she easily could have been in the top 5 at the games this year, if not for a crash in the first 30 seconds of the first race of the weekend. And yeah, this so anyway, and I think Alyssa's saying here, I don't think Roman had to. I think he chose to, and I don't actually know if that's correct or not. I know he had a choice when it came to the flag. I don't know what was communicated to him in the back about what would happen if he didn't go out and take the floor for events 11 and 12. Based on what happened with Jamie Simmons, it seems like nothing would happen, but no one's really talking about it. If he didn't take the floor at all for tests 11 and 12, and then he was still awarded a podium spot, everyone would be talking about it.
Oh yeah.
But because the same thing happened to Jamie, 15 spots on the leaderboard where it's not as big of a deal, no one's talking about it. And I think that's, I don't think that's correct. I think that we need to look at this and say, hey, well, this is supposed to be the world championship event. It's supposed to be very, well ran and consistent application of the rules for the athletes whenever possible. And in this case, that clearly wasn't what happened.
I want to shift focus here. And obviously we're looking at the scoreboard. Heard you brought up some things. Our good friend Tyler Watkins, he's a big proponent of Z-score. You've talked about the benefits of that. Have you been able to put some of these scores into the Z-score system? And has there been any like major discrepancies or anything different from what was finally shown, what we finally got in terms of placing?
Yeah, I mean, if you don't know who Tyler Watkins is, he has introduced this concept of Z-score at many different intervals over the past couple of years, and he's also now has the Heat One app, which is pretty good in terms of what we've ever seen in terms of the fantasy perspective. And I've worked with him on that over the years. And yes, he has run the Z-score for this competition. Now it's quite difficult to do because, as I referenced earlier, there's some information that we don't have.
Yeah.
But we were able to make, kind of an approximation there. And there's, I think that this is it's good in light of the context that we've been talking about of the minimum work requirement that you're asking for. Basically, what Z-score is proposing is that your score should be relative to your performance against the field that took the test, not your placement. In the placement scoring system, there's incentive to not necessarily try. Depending on at some point in the workout, depending on how things are going. That could be that you're the best swimmer in the field and it's a swimming test. And once you get a big enough lead, you just kind of coast it in because whether you can't get more than 100 points anyway. And no matter if you beat the guy behind you by a second or an hour, he's going to get 96 or 97 points, whatever the scoring system happens to be. In this model, it encourages people to go for it no matter where they are on the leaderboard, because it's their time or their reps or their score relative to the field that's going to dictate their points. So two examples, if in the harshest version of this model, which we've experimented but never really rolled out there, you can actually get negative points for your performance. And so someone like Emma Carey having what happened to her on the bike could actually result in a negative score, which would prevent her from even making the first cut. And even though she might have been the fourth or fifth fittest woman in the field, we could have missed her from the competition altogether. Now, it also could have, she might have tried harder during that workout to avoid having that happen. And it also might put a little bit more pressure on the directors of the competition or programmers of the competition to program mindfully with those types of scenarios in mind. I think that that's not necessarily a bad thing. And I don't think, as we just kind of talked about, that it's something that they're always thinking about. On the flip side of the situation, it really encourages athletes that are way ahead to dominate. And we had, even though there is no Z scoring at this games, we had the best example of that in the ski bag workout from Laura Horvath. So she won this event going away. It was incredibly impressive. You see her time there is 4:36. And if you scroll, you don't even have to scroll down. Alex Kazan was second at 5:50. That's nearly, was that 80 seconds different?
Yeah. Over a minute.
Yeah. On a 5-minute workout. In the Z-score model, I think that Laura earns 100 points, as the winner always does, and the next person earns like 72. And we don't have a lot of examples of people crushing workouts like this. Matt Fraser on Friendly Fran during the online stage of 2021 games would be a similar example. But, really astute minds recognized how dominating this performance was. A friend of mine called me after this one. He's like, dude, I think that immediately goes into the top 10, 15 performances I've ever seen on an individual workout by anyone at the CrossFit Games, because she dominates the field. But she only gains 3 points on Alex, whereas she would have gained 28 in the Z-score model on the entire field. So there's a lot. And then in terms of your big picture question, there were, I think, more variability on the women's side than the men's side. I think Katrin actually would have moved up a little bit in the top 10. Gabby would have moved down. A couple women might have, right on the cut line, there might have been 1 or 2 women that were in or out differently. And then on the men's side in the top 10, I think Yona Koski jumped all the way to either 3rd or 4th, and Dallin Pepper slid down to about 8th. But again, if you think about that, there's, the way that the Z-score works is it's gonna reward some of those big performances, and we know that Yona has the potential to do that
in multiple events. With the Z-score, obviously, I think the Z-score would have had a lot of effect on the cut line. Were there any notable names that got cut that through the Z-score system? The name that pops up to mind for me is Christine Cullenbrander, who, relative to the field did, she did really well on the lifting event on the final cut. But were there any other athletes that kind of just stood out to you when it came to the cut line in comparison to the Z-score versus traditional scoring?
It wasn't massively dramatic around the cut line. There were, looking at the men's side here. How does he have this organized? No, I think it was pretty tame on the men's side around the cut lines. And you asked about Cullenbrander. Cullenbrander does worse in the Z-score than the traditional model. She actually finishes 29th and set at 22nd. And Rebecca Vidison moves up from 25th to 21st, but there's not a lot of play on the cut lines, really. Sydney Wells makes the cut, and she would end up 28th. Oh, no, I think she's 28th in either model. So no, it didn't have a huge effect on the cut line. There were 1 or 2 spots, but not a ton.
Okay.
I think Matilda Garnis moves into 30th. That was the one that would have made it through.
Oh, she would have
made
it through.
But then it's impossible to assess going forward because she didn't take those tests.
Yeah.
Jason. Yeah, and Sprague wouldn't have made the first cut. I see that here now. So, and that's you think about the tests that showed up in the early part of the competition, and why would that affect someone? Well, maybe James probably had a few workouts that he placed a lot better than his relative score. So he had these 31st and 34th place finishes on alpaca, redo, and ski bag. and the relative score that he's getting in Z-score might be dramatically less there.
Andrew Reyes says, doesn't that encourage the athletes to push themselves too hard against their competitors rather than running their own race and letting their fitness prove their placing regarding Z-scoring?
Push themselves too hard against their competitors? I mean, look, you're going to have to make a decision in these workouts anyway. And I mentioned it, the pig chipper. I think it seemed to be the biggest, like that there was just simply not enough time for the athletes to recover and do that test is my takeaway after reading enough of the athletes' assessments of it. And so, in an event like that, of want to use an example, like they're pushing as hard as they can. And, the body was telling them that's all I got. And so, whatever. But in other tests, and especially as the cuts come in, if you get down to when there's 20 athletes left and you're in the first heat and you realize you're at the back of your heat, you might just lose incentive. But you have to realize there's another heat to go. You could still, beat some people. And if you stay close enough, your score might be close enough to the mean that you can still get some meaningful points. So I think, what it's meant to do is to encourage competition, which is what we're paying, basically we're paying to see. Like we want to see the athletes compete. We want to see them go hard. What we don't want to see is people coasting in or just kind of, gaming it necessarily because they know that there's no opportunity to influence their points anyway.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, Steven says could also lead to an early blowout after 2 days that they
Possibly, but don't forget that if you are an athlete that's capable of creating a big points margin early in the week, why couldn't one of your competitors have that same potential later in the week? Consider what I just said about Ski Bag and Laura Horvat.
Yeah,
and remember what happened last year at the CrossFit Games, absent of Z scoring, is that if you're feeling good about your placement and suddenly someone like that comes along and has two dominating performances in a row, instead of only being, and let's say you finish second on both tests anyway, or fifth or whatever, instead of her gaining 6 to 20 points on you, she could potentially gain 60 in 2 tests, not against you, against the field. So, it like yes and no. I can understand what Steven's saying there, but I think that it can also be dangerous.
Did you get a chance to watch Justin and Ellie's YouTube video they put out?
I've been trying to catch up on as much content as possible. I haven't watched that one, but I have heard from a number of people who watched it, and what I've heard is kind of deterred me from feeling like I necessarily needed to. Did you watch it?
Yes, I did. It did. I mean, he didn't seem like he made any excuses. Just the point that he just needs to be better. Basically, what I got from it, and Ellie talked about her back injury. I mean, obviously hers is pretty more cut and dry in terms of her performance. Like ironically fit, I guess Hiller did a video on that. He did. But that's basically what Justin came down to saying is like, he has no excuses. He just needs to be better. And that there were things that happened that he didn't realize were happening. And I thought it was a good explanation, I guess. I don't know how. I mean, I don't know if it's necessarily he's saying everything, and he doesn't deserve. I mean, he doesn't owe that to us to explain everything that happened. So, but for him to go out there, I mean, I have no reason to think that I go back to the thing. I go back to this. I think the field has just gotten better. That people are fitter, and it's hard to be a 2-time defending fittest person on earth. It just raises everyone's game, and for him, I think that's the impossible part for someone like a champion like him. How do you raise your game even further? You stick with what you know. Meanwhile, everyone else is chasing you, and they have a more, I don't know. It's easier for them to improve on their fitness than it is for the champion to improve on their fitness, in my opinion.
I mean, there are a million factors, and it's
Sure.
like the contrast is someone like Jason Hopper. Jason Hopper had I would say, you could argue he had a worse performance relative to expectation than Justin Medeiros, even. At least in terms of raw finish. I think most people were expecting Jason to be probably somewhere 3 through 10. Most people were expecting Justin to be 1 through 3. He was 10 spots worse than that. Jason was 21 spots worse than the kind of the lowest expected finish, and he didn't put out a video like that. He didn't make any excuses. He's moving on. And he actually put up something funny about his wife.
Yeah.
So there's these different, there's different approaches to it. If I was speculating that Justin might have had something happen to him on the bike. It didn't seem like he was making that excuse. He just kind of said, I'm not good enough. I wasn't good enough. I didn't have whatever that I've used to have in the past. And, he'll have to go back and deal with that. And I did see the title of Hiller's video, and I know it can sometimes be just, clickbait or whatever, but it's, will Medeiros ever win the games again? We'll see. It's, it's not an easy thing to do once. He's done it twice. He's only 23 or 4 years old. So like, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility, but clearly something was off with him this season. And maybe he's not even able to put his finger on it. I do. Yeah. Rhonda Wilson comment here, if we can pull that up. 2023 rule book says points are retained after withdrawal for injury. So I'm aware of that. But my question is why? Why did they make that change? And that is a significant change, especially given the fact that there are prize money available at every stage of the competition. And what this opens up the door for is an athlete to look and say, oh, shoot, well, there's one event to go. I can't give away any more spots. I'm just going to say I'm injured and take my money and go home. Like, it encourages people to not act within the spirit of the competition. So I would, if you're going to change a rule like that impacts, like I mentioned earlier, it can impact sponsorships, it can impact prize purse, it can impact athletes' decisions within the competition. You better give me an explanation for it, because as it is, it doesn't look good for the competition organizers, in my opinion.
I'm going to pull up another question here from Brian Thompson. Where can we find leaderboard that shows placings after each event? Here, let me pull that up. It's actually we actually have something on our B.Friendly site. Hold on, let me find it here. Where should be able to pull that stuff up. But Mike Halpin from Known and Knowable, he came up with a pretty cool graphic. I'll pull it up right now.
Yeah, I mean, this is something I think is pretty helpful to know in general. Halpin has helped me with this in some different contexts over the last year and a half or so. And we had this, he was obviously working with B.Friendly Fitness this year. And this is one of the main things he did. Podium helped make this possible. So thanks to them. But yeah, this was quite a tedious process, actually. It took him a few hours every night to do it. But instead of just putting up a leaderboard that shows, here are the results, the standings, and the points after the day, which everyone likes to do, he wanted, I talked to him about the possibility of creating this. And so we came up with a template for it. He did all the legwork, but you can go and see how everyone was moving up and down throughout the course of each day of competition. And then at the end of the day, how many points they were back from the overall leader.
Yeah. And we apologize. We do have the final day. We'll get that up. I think Halpin's going to also put it up on his page as well. So we didn't put up the final day of competition, but we will get that up. So that way, at least historically, you can do that. But thanks for the question there. I think we've kind of beaten a dead horse. That is the games. I mean, 3 hours and then another hour of us talking about the games here. That's 4 hours of recap. I obviously we can talk about that all day, but the point of the show is kind of look at the whole season as a whole. So we're again working backwards. Let's going back to semis now. Did we get the right athletes to the game? Did the fittest people arrive? Were they there competing in Madison, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, that's a massive question. And I think that there are, certain things that happen at the CrossFit Games that make you kind of raise an eyebrow a little bit. And, you listen to someone like Yella Hosta in one of his interviews talk about the fact that, sorry, draw your daggers, making me laugh. Talk about, Yella Hosta talks about the fact that for him, it's a lot harder to get to the CrossFit Games. And that once he gets there, he feels really good about his potential to perform at the highest level of his ability. And this happens a lot. And throughout the history of the CrossFit Games, people talk about this, is that it's a totally different objective to qualify for the games than to excel at the CrossFit Games. And even in the case of Jamie Simmons or Katrin David's daughter, who missed the games last year, as soon as they were entered back into the games field this year, which obviously they had to earn by their performances in semifinals, I was like, why couldn't they make the top 10? They're so good at the CrossFit Games. And there's so many things about the CrossFit Games that are different. So you have to, in order to answer a question like this, ultimately we need CrossFit. We need CrossFit to tell us what is the point of all of the field that's collected to compete at the CrossFit Games. Historically, their line has been, we're looking for the fittest person on earth. We're not looking for the fittest group of people on earth. We don't care about who's second, third, fourth, eighth, ninth, 10th, 21st, second, third. We want to know we find the fittest, and we feel like we have come up with a process to get to the games and a test at the games that's produced the fittest person on earth every year. There are a couple of years that could be questioned for sure, based on injury, illness, the qualification process, and a variety of other things. And in the case of this season, people are asking those questions. So in the article I wrote about Jeff Adler, I put that question there. Was he the fittest person in Madison? Am I 100% convinced that Jeff Adler was fitter than Roman Kretikov? No. Am I 100% convinced he was fitter than Pat Vellner? No. He had a cleaner execution. He managed the weekend better, and so he gets the title of fittest on earth this year. Was he one of the three best there? I think absolutely he was. But it's most years we've had a dominant athlete or two on each side that make it pretty easy for CrossFit if that's their only objective. I think that the community and the people who are invested in this sport, that they want more. I think that people want to know who was the 5th fittest this year, who was the 10th fittest, who was the 20th fittest. And that's why when I bring up examples like Emma Carey and how the inclusion of that specific bike race affected her overall ranking this year, that we might have a little bit of a misleading placement relative to her actual capacity against the field. If the goal is to have the 40 fittest competing at the games, and I will always give this caveat, I have absolutely no problem with having a representative from every part of the world. And I think that anyone who listens to my stuff knows that having, in this case, they're calling them competitive regions. That's what the semifinals are labeled as, competitive regions. If you want to have one person from every competitive region in the world at the games, absolutely. I have no problem with that at all. Beyond that, I want to see the fittest people on earth competing there. And if that means that there's 15 of them that come out of Europe, so be it. I don't care. And I know that there are people that have a ton of pride in their part of the world, but it's like, hey, there should be a system in place that allows for the competitors at the top of this sport to prove their fitness during the season and earn those spots, and then go to the games and have a chance to show out and show what they can do. And, the fact that we are getting increasingly improved performances from different parts of the world. Last year, Sungyoung Choi had the best ever finish for a woman out of the Asia semifinal. This year, Sahar Kaya improved on that by 3 spots. I love seeing that. That's why we want to keep the one. And if they earn a second one, great. This current system doesn't allow for that. Barbell spin, myself, a bunch of others have illuminated all of the problems. Dave Eubanks has alluded to the fact that there's an intention to go and revise that system. I think that there's plenty of now... We've put it out there. There's plenty of data and resources out there for you to implement a system that's much better in terms of achieving that objective. But that's only half of the conversation. The other half of the conversation is, what are we testing for at semifinals compared to what we're looking for at the games? And is that process appropriate? And in particular, when we look at someone like Ant Haynes, okay, why was Ant Haynes unable to qualify out of his competitive region? And the other person who was able to qualify out of that region convincingly, Artur Semenov, did dramatically worse than him at the CrossFit Games. What's missing? Like, it's like that's a red flag for me. Or you think about someone like Rebecca Wittesen. She was barely able to qualify out of Europe. She beat half of the women that came out of Europe or something like that.
Yeah.
She, and in the Z-square model, she would have done even better. But she outperforms. Well, I guess she outperformed Adilta Garnis, Ella Wunger, Manu Nangonis, Emma McQuaid. So 4, out of the 11. Yeah. Think about Kelly Baker, barely able to sneak in. She wouldn't have made the cut. She's given an opportunity to make the cut. She almost makes the next cut. Who knows what happens if she competes on Sunday? So and I'm not saying that your performance in semifinal should necessarily be indicative of your performance at the games, but there were several examples of this during this season of athletes who either didn't make it on first attempt or barely got in that go to the games and have a quite different performance there. And when you see that happen, it makes you wonder about people who just barely missed out. And in some cases, those are Danny Spiegels and Guimaeros. And would they have done better at the games and semifinals? Probably. And in other cases, like the European men, that's a guy like Colin Bossard. And it's like, well, we don't know how he would have done if he'd been able to make the games. But did the European men have the correct number of athletes there relative to their performance this season? The data says no, one extra spot at the games, and who knows how this guy ends up doing. So, and look, there's always going to be someone who doesn't make it. So, and it's probably never going to be a perfect process. But I do think that there were some notable examples at the CrossFit Games this year that should hopefully put CrossFit in the mind to ask those questions. I mean, I think that those are guys that always want to get better. I saw this firsthand from Adrian over the last 12 months. His intention to implement certain things, to have a better process, to have a better test, to have a better presentation. And I think he succeeded in that. And I'm sure that he'll reflect on some of this stuff and hopefully look to make another step forward next year. Big picture, I don't think the worldwide ranking and strength of field system is doing what it advertises itself to do. And I think that we can improve it for next season.
And you bring up the worldwide rankings, and Halpin brought, this was an article that was printed right before the games regarding breaking the worldwide rankings, that there were, and you bring up some of the faults in the worldwide ranking and the strength of field. But luckily for CrossFit, none of these scenarios happened, but it wasn't out of the realm of possibility. And so how do you rework the worldwide rankings and the strength of field? I mean, what are your expectations from CrossFit in terms of fixing some of these things, or do they just leave it alone and it's like, hey, it worked? Adler won the games and he was number one in the worldwide ranking. Same with Laura Horvath. There's no error there.
Well, those are two very big and different questions.
Sure.
My expectations from CrossFit are very different than necessarily what I would do.
Sure.
Throughout this year, I've kind of laid out a model that I think has some merit. And if it's not a perfect model, it's the 15% model that Halpin and I worked on throughout the season. And if it's not a perfect model, I think it's a great jumping off point for a conversation that can help create a more refined system in terms of evaluating the competitive landscape this year, because that's what we're awarding spots for. And then I think at the semifinals in particular, that there's that's the opportunity to pull in past data to evaluate strength of field, what I would call strength of field. So you can see that there have been X number of athletes per continent or competitive region who were good enough at the early stages of the season to participate in semifinals. I feel like every test should be vetting for the next test. And that's kind of what I was alluding to at the semifinals versus the games programming. Like, what we're testing for at the Open, setting up athletes for success at quarterfinals, and quarterfinals to semis and semis to games. Like, those should be building upon each other so that by the time we get to the games, we know that we have a group of individuals there who's ready for the test that they're about to take. In certain cases, like a road bike is a good example, you're not going to be able to test a road bike or a swim probably at all 7 semifinals around the world. Just talking about the model from 2023. Obviously, we don't know what 2024 is going to look like. But if that's the case, then they can do what they did with the crit in 2018 and say, hey, you're going to have to learn how to clip into the bike. You have a month to figure it out. These athletes are good enough to figure that out in a month, at least to be competent if they're not proficient already. As far as my expectations for CrossFit, I would have to take Dave Eubanks at his word that he's going to go and look at what the model was this year, what he liked about it, what he didn't like it, or his team. I mean, I know he worked on a team with a team on that. I would hope that he would consider some of the things that people like myself have put out there that are meant to be resources to help with that process. And if he wants to reach out to some of us who have passion for the sport and for trying to get those things in the right position, that would be very well received. There are the people out here, including myself, that would love to be a part of that process, because I think that ultimately what we can do together is better than any of us can do on our own, which is create a system that's understandable and rewarding for the athletes and the fans.
Ironically fit, will you be doing a video on the worldwide rankings update?
So after the games every year, there's basically 3 things that I'll do. One of them is
play disc golf.
Play disc golf every day. No. So first, what I like to do is update my all-time rankings list. As the years go on, I've been building that out a little bit. So actually, within a week from now, I'll put out my updated all-time rankings for the top 40 men and 40 women of all time. That's like a good starting point for me. I only do that once a year. I've been doing it for several years. I think I've been releasing it publicly for 3 years now. I think I went from 20 to 30, and this year I'm going to go to 40, and I think I'll probably stick at 40. Maybe I'll go to 50 eventually. But, there's some new people in the list this year. There's some that were on the list that moved up, obviously. And then, of course, people move down as others move up. It's not dramatic. The articles won't be super long. I do think that we might come on and talk about it. And, one of the big question is, what do you do with Laura Horvath now? And I wrote that article last week. I really, really have been appreciative and enjoyed the conversation and thought-provoking comments, DMs, questions that people have put out there surrounding that conversation. To me, there are some high-level thoughts being expressed on both sides. I didn't answer the question of if she's the second fittest of all time in that article. I think some people assumed that I had. Someone was like, "Man, I really agree with you here," and I'm like, "Agree with what?" She's like, "Well, I thought it would be Annie."
They didn't see the question mark.
But now I think
we had
Laura,
a question mark at the end of that time.
Yeah, and it's not easy. So I like to spend some time and sit with that. And so I'll put those out here pretty soon, and we can do a show to talk about that for sure. Barbell spin, I have to give him some credit. I think what he's doing in terms of the media poll is gaining some traction and gaining some credibility. I actually had a conversation with him yesterday that I need to tell you about, Patrick. Okay. He wants the results for his poll tomorrow, and I don't know if I'm ready to submit mine or not. I told him I am interested in being a part of it because, as with many things, I think that there's value in having one person's perspective, but there's probably more accuracy in having a variety of people's perspective. That's why you have things like the AP poll and the coaches poll in college football that are, they represent different parts of the community or that sport, but both of them are a collection of people's perspectives. And as a result, you get probably a better overall leaderboard. What I really want to do is make my, and he's only asking for 25. And he's asking for projections for next year's CrossFit Games, which is different than how I usually do my own power rankings. I don't know if I'm going to have time to get involved with that or not, because before I would do that, what I really want to do is my own worldwide rankings, which I've been doing also for a couple of years. I've been expanding the number of athletes that I include in that. And it's fun, and it's fun for me because now everyone's thrown back into the mix. So all of the team athletes that could potentially compete individually, all the athletes that took this year off for pregnancy, illness, injury, or any other reason, they're all in the mix. And so you get, and to some extent, this happens with Spins Poll too. You get the opportunity to ask questions like, okay, I have no idea if Mal O'Brien, Haley Adams will compete next year. If they do, where would I throw them in the mix? How do they compare to someone like Emma Lawson, Emma Carey, Alexis Raptis, Alex Kazan, who we just saw these great seasons from? And so there's, it's kind of fun to do that, but there's obviously a bit of guessing, and to the same extent. So in my perfect world, I would do my all-time rankings. I would do my power rankings heading into 2024, and then I would consider participating in Spins Poll. So maybe I'll do the next version of Spins Poll because I don't feel like I'm necessarily ready right now. Yeah, there's the one from September of last year. Is that right?
Yeah. Yep. 49 weeks ago, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll be a little faster this time around. This have some data in it. So maybe we'll do a post similar to this. I've written the articles and created them. I do have all this data, but it's nice to kind of see it laid out there. And then, if you are into this kind of stuff, there's no exact science. I wrote that in the article. It's kind of figuring it out.
And then you brought up some notable names. Again, Roman, Lazar, based on your criteria.
Yeah, and actually from this list, some of them have moved up into the top 40 this year. Obviously, Roman and Lazar pretty easily. Guy didn't compete this year, but still, his resume over 3 years is still good. Yeah,
he'll still be considered. Same with Will Morad, and I'm not sure where Willie would fit into that. I guess technically he would. I don't know, but in terms of, he would still be probably in the top 200 or 100 or whatever.
Sure.
But so moving, is there anything else you want to say regarding semis? Because I feel like we pretty much beat a dead horse prior to semis, and then looking back at it, I think we pretty much covered.
You can't say beat a dead horse any more times on this podcast.
Did I say that? How many times have I said it?
2. One too many.
Two? Oh, okay. Well, that's because I own 2 horses, and
Oh,
no,
fine.
I'm just
Yeah.
kidding. All right. Yeah, but yeah. So, well, let's obviously we have the semis. Let's move on to the online portion. So let's group that together: open and quarterfinals. Is this? I mean, that's a lot of testing. I mean, I guess altogether for individuals, it's 16 total tests, right?
Prior
I
to
think
getting
that's
to the
what.
game, 16 tests this
Yeah,
year. Yeah.
yeah. Is that too many? Is that way too much testing?
I'm not sure. And I think, when you're evaluating this season and then maybe you're thinking about what next season could look like, one of the big questions is, can CrossFit with the team that they have execute the online portions of the competitions well? And the last 2 years, I feel like the majority resounding response was that it wasn't as good as we'd hoped it could be. If there's also been a lot of conversation about the game season looking different next year. Keep in mind that this year in the Open, there were over 30 divisions that started the season. A handful of the adaptive divisions dropped out after that. And then there were, I think 27 divisions that competed the rest of the year to some extent or another. That's a lot. If the season does look differently, which I've heard some people talking about the possibility of breaking away from everyone competing in the CrossFit Games in the same way, and there might be a
Yeah.
different structure to
Host.
season for masters, age groups, adaptives. I don't know much about what that would or could look like, but I do think that it's worth bringing up in the context of your question. If that happens and those things are to some extent outsourced from only being the sole responsibilities for CrossFit, and they're able to hone in on only 3 divisions, which would be the elite male, female, and team divisions, I think that they can obviously invest more resources into making sure that the online portion of the season, whether it's 1 or 2 competitions, is executed at a higher level. I think that there is opportunity for growth in that regard.
Okay. What's that growth look like, though? I mean, I guess we can.
So it's on 2 fronts. One is from the programming perspective. Do we feel that the Open and quarterfinals are necessary as standalone tests? A, and B, are they doing what we talked about earlier, which is actually vetting for each stage of competition, making sure that the test is appropriate, so that those who took the test and are advancing to the next stage, whatever it is, have the prerequisite skills and strength to take the next test. Obviously, no matter what, there's going to be cuts, from stage to stage. But it's, I don't really like the what happened this year, which is that you had thousands of women advancing to the quarterfinals who couldn't do a ring muscle up or a strict handstand push-up or bodyweight thruster, or in some cases, all 3 of those things, that were still being able to advance to the next stage of competition that demanded heavy front squats, more strict handstand push-ups, wall facing, and more ring muscle ups. And it was, in some cases, women who are just looking at these like, why did I even, why did I pay this money, or why did I even qualify for this stage of competition if all there's going to be is 2, 3 of the 5 tests that I can't even do.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. I don't know.
The other side of that conversation is that the administration of those stages of the season. So from the way that the workouts are presented, are the movement standards accurate? Are the scorecards accurate? Are they easy to understand? Are they appropriate for the demographic that's taking it, which is the entire world? And I think that we had examples of scorecards being inaccurate this year. To me, that shouldn't happen. And we had some of these new things introduced, which is it's not a problem to introduce new things, but if you do, you need to be very specific and careful about how you do that. I think the V-Up and the shuttle runs the last 2 years are great examples of introducing things which I think are perfectly fine to test, but they weren't communicated in a way that was easy enough for everyone to understand, and they resulted in more problems than they were worth, in my opinion. So if you want to do something like that, and especially if this ends up happening where there's less divisions taking these early parts of the season tests that CrossFit is specifically responsible for, which I have no idea if that's going to be the case or not, because it could still, even if the Masters division did break off, it's still, the Open could still be the barrier to entry for everyone. And the CrossFit Games internal team could still be responsible for the totality of that programming, which is the same undertaking that they would have had this year. But regardless, I think that those things can be doled out in a way that is going to be more well received by the community that's participating, and going to be easier on the competition that has to manage the results.
Well, I don't think the Open's going to go anywhere because obviously you've seen so much growth in the Open over the last couple of years, and plus it's a major. I mean, CrossFit gets a lot of money from the Open. If you think about 300,000 people,
Mm-hmm.
competing
Absolutely.
in.
But
Yeah.
if the Open, you say the Open doesn't go anywhere, but let's just say hypothetically that the Pit Teen Throwdown, which is kind of the premier teenage competition outside of the game season, is going to partner with CrossFit to run the Teenage Games season for 2024. Well, suddenly your resources are more. So when you're writing those workouts, you write the workout that the masses, that's just the Open workout 24.1. And then you have to have versions of it for the teenagers. Well, you can bring in those people and say, hey, what are the appropriate versions for these people? And they can get a set of eyes on that specifically, which is their main interest. And we can make sure that everything that's being presented on the teenage division is appropriate, is accurate, etc. Or we have a much higher likelihood to do that with more eyes on it. And a set of eyes that really, really cares about that specific demographic. The same thing could potentially happen with adaptive. The same thing could potentially happen with the masters divisions. The same thing could happen with the team division, is that, when I asked Adrian about this, he said he likes to have first eyes and last eyes on all the programming for all the divisions, for all the stages of the season, which is that is so much to be the person that's responsible for all of that. It's okay to get eyes on it. And absolutely, you want to have some congruency. I get that. And to what I said earlier, these things should be building upon each other for every division at every stage. But, having, if you are the person that's having first and last eyes on 30 different divisions, how much can you really care and invest into every one of those 30 divisions? Not nearly as much as you could if there was only 3 or 4, or if you have a group of people that have already invested kind of their whole professional pursuit towards those 4 divisions, as the Pit Teen Throwdown as an example is doing.
You're probably not ready for this, but I'm going to throw it at you anyways. If you had to grade the 2023 CrossFit season, what grade would you give it?
I struggle to just keep things simple.
I know. That's why I'm giving you.
I feel like I would want to have categories,
No, I'm not letting you off that easy. One grade, once there. That's it. Totality of the season, one grade.
B-.
B-. I like that. I can go with B-. I was thinking B for myself. I don't know what other people are thinking, but B-.
Yeah, and basically what I'm saying is that I think there was more good than bad. I think that there were some positive steps taken forward from last year, and I think that there's still quite a bit of opportunity to improve.
Yeah, I definitely see that. I mean, yeah. All right, so let's just get rid of the 2023 season's over. Brian gives it a B-. We're moving on. 2023. Well, it's 2024 season. I guess this officially kicks off the 2024 season. Scott Pansky D gets degrees, baby. He must have seen my my GPA from college. So what's the B.Friendly, I don't know, world tour look like this year? I mean, what do we have planned? More specific, what do you have planned? I mean, you're leaving today, aren't you? You're supposed to leave today. Hopefully you leave today.
Yeah, no, I'm packed up. I'm ready to go. I'm gonna hit the road basically for the next 7 weeks.
7 weeks.
Big picture for B.Friendly this off season. My goals are to get more involved in more communities, like competitive CrossFit communities around the world. And we're starting off pretty hot in that regard. So the first place I'm going is to Finland for a competition that I'm gonna need to learn to pronounce the name better than I can right now, because I'm doing the broadcast there with a woman from Finland, the Turin Tuomiopäivä, something pretty close to that. Programmed by Jona Koski. And it's and I actually spoke to Jona and Henrik Eppalainen at the games. They found out that I was going to be out there, and they were pretty excited about that. So never been to Finland. I'm looking forward to getting out there. I have a good friend over there who has been involved in running the kind of the high level competitions in Finland for years. So that'll be great. And then coming back from that, I'm going to go out to the Iron Games, which is technically our first B.Friendly certified competition. Worked with those guys a little bit prior to the games, saw their programming layouts, had a good conversation with them, and also communicated with you guys about some of the cool and unique things about that competition. Actually just promoted it again yesterday, and Dallin Pepper reached out and he was like, dude, that's a really well-run competition. James and another buddy of ours did it a couple years ago, and we had a blast. Everything ran on time, super well organized. And that's a competition that, Tommy Marquez and the Buttery Bros have competed in, and they know those guys really well going back college and even before in some cases. So I've heard some great things about that from a bunch of people who I respect, and excited to finally get involved there. But like, that's a good example
and that's out in Utah, right?
Yeah. So those are like, two good examples of kind of what I would, want to do. It's like, I'm trying to go to different parts of the world and meet some different people, CrossFit culture and scenes in different countries, and then go to some competitions that I've had on my radar for a while and just haven't had a chance to get out to. And the next one after that is actually the Pit Team Throwdown, which I was going to go to 2 years ago. Last minute was unable to. Stephanie Price has been super nice, always invites me to come. And so this year I'm going to go out there and provide a little coverage of what's going on there. So those are the first three off the bat, and then it's back over to Europe.
Where in Europe are you going?
Madrid CrossFit Championship. I'll be doing the broadcast there with my buddy Greg Langto out of Montreal.
We love big Greg fans here.
Yeah, and Bella Martin will be down there on the floor doing some interviews.
He's also a fellow sports card collector, so
I was waiting for it. I had a feeling. And then I'm going to stay in Europe for a little bit. I'm going to go up to Sweden. Roger Grios runs a bunch of competitions in Norway and Sweden. There's a community event. It's called the Halmstad Throwdown. There won't be any pros there or anything like that, but that's just, again, see a different community. I'm going to go visit Mads Jacobsen in Sweden for 2 days before heading to the competition. And then I'm going to go with Roger to Norway after that, to Oslo. Obviously, there's an incredible CrossFitting community there in Oslo. Yeah. So just while I'm in that part of the world, take another chance to go up there before coming back to the States. And then the last two stops before coming home are at the Power Monkey Camp, which I met those guys last year at the Masters Fitness Collective. And we talked about it and have set this up. And then I'm going to go from Power Monkey Camp straight to Masters Fitness Collective. So get some touches with the teenagers and then also with the Masters community early on in the off season.
Wow. And I think that's all before October, right? Pretty much.
Yeah, I guess it's August 15th, and I'll be home on October 2nd.
Okay. And what's your address again, just in case people want to just get your mail or, just, that's probably why you have no plants right now, right?
It is. I didn't buy any house plants because I knew I was going to be traveling so much.
Yeah. But damn, that's a lot of stuff you got. It's just 7 weeks of travel there and going from Europe to the U.S., back to Europe, back to the U.S. And then that pretty much brings us right to the end of September leading into Rogue.
Yeah, and I know that someone had asked earlier. So we have some other plans following that. I was going to do Zalos Games. It's not going to happen in October. May not happen at all. We'll see. But Crash Crucible, I'll be doing commentary from there. JR Howell's competition. They just had their qualifiers, so I'm looking forward to seeing who made it. And then I know he's got some invited athletes coming. That should be pretty good competition.
Just looking at the invite list. I mean, he's got, I think he just announced Stovall. He has one of our friends, Elia Miller's competing. So a lot of semifinal athletes that are maybe really
ascending.
Close. Yeah, ascending. I mean, that's really impressive. I mean, if people really want to see that next batch of possible games athletes, I think the Crash, and we all know GR just, he programs, he puts on a good show. The prize money is pretty robust. He's got some decent sponsors. So I'm really excited to see what you guys do there, especially with the broadcast team. I know Rick Jones from the media team there, that, in-house media team, he does a great job. So I'm really looking forward to that as well. And I think that Wild Zombie,
No, yeah. So that'll be October Crash Crucible, and then we will be down in Rogue, of course, at the end of October as usual.
Mhm.
So that'll be fun. And then after that, Desert City Classic in Arizona, which Taylor and JR and I have helped to program or done the programming for. And then the Charlotte Classic here,
Mhm.
which Taylor and I are running. We've done most of the. He's done a majority of the testing. I've done some of the testing for both those competitions. But it's. I mean, a lot of times, even when I'm doing commentary at certain places, I like to test the workouts out to get a feel for what the athletes are going to experience. I obviously modify them for my own capacity to try to get a similar stimulus. But in the case of both those competitions, I'm pretty excited for what we've been able to come up with. I've heard some really good things about Desert City. I've never been to the Charlotte Classic either, so those will be
Mhm.
new ones for me in November. And then December is probably the most unknown. The only thing that I
Yeah.
have for sure on the calendar is Dubai, which I'll be doing the commentary there with Derek again. And I'm pretty excited to, that's like 4 or 5 different competitions I'll get to do the commentary or the broadcasting for this year. I've done a few in the past, and I like being able to do that. So excited for the opportunities for those.
Well, I know people are really they appreciate hearing your insight during the broadcast because I know I do, but I know other people do
Well,
as
and it'll
well.
be,
So,
and it'll be interesting because, like for Dubai, I think there's a good chance that I'll know a lot about a majority of the athletes. But
mhm.
like in Finland, I know a couple. Like I looked through the roster, I think there's maybe like 5 or 6 names that I recognize, and I don't know a ton about them. So that'll be like a challenging in a different way. And then
Yeah.
Madrid's probably somewhere in the middle. Um, and then that brings us to January. January, we got 3 competitions that we're most likely will be at: Wadapalooza, Fittest of the Coast, which is in South Carolina, and then the Fittest Experience down in Texas, which is similar to the Iron Game, is the ones that I've had on my radar for a while and never been able to get to. But I did have a meeting with Jeremy Teal and a few of the women who helped organize that competition prior to the games. Saw Jeremy at the games, and going to try to get out there for that one too.
Speaking of seeing people at the game, was there someone at the games? Again, surprising with this question. Someone that you ran to at the games, you're like, man, was not expecting to see this guy. Or I'm glad they came by, guy or girl, and it was just like someone that was just a highlight. And you don't have to pick me or anyone in the chat, but just like someone like, man, I'm totally surprised this person showed up, and I'm glad that I got to hang out and talk to them.
Now, I'm not surprised this person showed up, but it was the first time that I really had met him, and it was fun to meet him. It was Patrick Vellner's dad.
Oh, nice. Were you wearing a Vellner jersey when you met him?
No, but he did give me this button.
Oh,
and he was,
oh,
and it was kind of funny. Like I don't know if people have seen him before, but Pat resembles him quite a bit. They both have broad shoulders, long arms, blonde hair, big smiles, easy to get along with personality. He seemed like quite a strong dude, very funny, a lot of energy. So, and like I said, I wasn't expecting to run into him. So when you asked that question, that was one person that jumped out right away.
yeah. Well, I know we talked about having guests on these friendly conversations, and I think I'm going to really try whenever we figure out what your travel schedule is, try to get Vellner on with. I think that'd be kind of cool, especially if you guys can trade some stories about Vellner Senior there. So, but
Yeah, and just like I know it's going to be difficult with all the travel to necessarily produce the volume of content that I might want to otherwise, but I will try to be still doing a little bit of writing. I'm going to try to do at least one of these from every location that I go to, and then yeah, we'll just kind of take it from there. But some of the stuff obviously that we'll be producing is relative to the competitions
mhm.
itself, and then others just kind of check-ins as we learn new things about the season, or I'm learning some stuff on the road. So hopefully can not just be experiencing new communities within the CrossFit sport for myself, but sharing some of that stuff with you guys as well. I think that's a good step to take in terms of bridging some of the gaps that are sometimes missing from the international and the smaller or feeder competitive CrossFit communities to the kind of the biggest stages that we're used to being integrated with.
Yeah, and I don't think anyone's ever done that. I know when we're at Morning Chalk Up, there were some competitions off season that we covered, but not the level that you're doing and what B Friendly is. And that's part of the goal is to is to be more community driven from a competition standpoint. And I think, the next 7 weeks is really going to test that. So, some of the content we're going to come out with is going to be really unique. I look forward to seeing it. And where can we find a lot of this content? Obviously, you can find it on our Instagram. Expect a lot of Instagram reels of Brian, maybe akin to his event recaps for some of these events. Obviously, our website, our YouTube channel. Like I said, we hope to have at least one video a week. Us catching up and maybe talking about any of the latest news that comes out, and then of course Brian's personal page. What else am I missing? We're working on some merch. Obviously, we still have our core t-shirts available. I know our shirts, they were a hit at CrossFit at the games. I think I told a couple people the story, but there was nothing more proud when we're sitting in the stands and I just looked around and I just saw a bunch of B.Friendly tie-dye shirts, and it was really cool to see that support coming from the community. And I know that was a really popular shirt. So thank you for everyone that purchased a B.Friendly shirt. For those who missed out on that opportunity that happen to be at one of these competitions that Brian's at, look for Brian. He might have some, I don't know, Brian, how many you might have some shirts on you. It's mainly like a first come, first serve. So
not for Finland. I don't think I'll have any. But starting with Madrid, I should have a few shirts around
a limited amount too.
People can get. And then the other thing is this is going to be a big challenge for me from a fitness perspective of just making sure to get workouts in and keep some semblance of fitness up with this much travel. I've been updating the friendly WODs for by month. So there was July friendly WODs was the first month that I put them up on the website. August friendly WODs. So I basically I won't put in workouts when I'm testing them for competitions. I might mention that I'm testing workouts, but that won't be happening too much anyway. So the workouts will be of a variety of natures from all over the place. I'll try to do them. I know some of you guys like doing the workouts that I do sometimes. I did one yesterday that I think is great with Echo Bike and Snatch. So if you hit any of those, always let me know. And if I don't put up any for a while, or you notice that, don't hesitate to bother me, because part of it is for accountability too.
Yeah, and like Brian says, the friendly WODs, if you go to the top of our page and click on friendly WODs, it'll take you right here. These are the July 2023. I thought we had August up there. Maybe
August is on the website.
But yeah. It is up on the website. Yeah, it's if you go to the front page, we need to tag it on the friendly WODs button at the top. But if you go to hold on here. August 2023 friendly WODs. So it's a working document that Brian will just be throwing in his workouts there. And like Brian said, if you trying these
That's
workouts,
the picture you picked?
I didn't pick that picture. I didn't pick that one. I have no idea who picked that. I blame Chad for that. We'll change it. We'll Photoshop your face on there, and
not John
definitely
Young's?
try these workouts. Yeah, John. By the way, when you get a chance, check out John Young's JY Barbell Fitness's Instagram. It's Sevon and Hiller. They did some. I guess they basically bought him a bunch of followers last night. They bought him 2,500 followers for his business. So if you haven't followed him, go ahead and follow John and maybe give us some legitimate followers, hopefully. Speaking of following, please don't forget about a contest that we're currently having for the Alex Kazan card, brought to you by Mint. You need to follow Mint, follow B.Friendly Fitness, and follow Alex Kazan. And if you tag a friend, and you'll be there it is, the additional entries. But I'm really pumped up about the cards, man. I mean, I was talking to Nick last night, and some of the athletes that have reached out to us, and it's pretty cool. And it's been cool just trying to find the images for those. So I'm really excited. I know Nick and Mint and Wad Zombie is as well. Other ways you can support us, the Patreon. Brian, you want to talk about the Patreon at all?
Yeah, I mean, we don't push it all the time.
Yeah.
There's not really any content that we're providing that's behind the paywall, but it's the best way, simplest way for you to support us on a monthly basis for all of the stuff that we have been doing and want to continue to do to, meet the goals that we've been talking about on this show of, continuing to travel, see the CrossFit community, and bring stories and, in some cases, look for maybe some up and coming athletes, some up and
Mhm.
coming personalities, or locations that could be helpful for the sport. The content we're producing, we're really fortunate and grateful to have guys like Barkley Dale and Mike Halpin and several other photographers, content producers that we've had this season. But we want to be able to support those guys too, and so supporting us helps in all of those regards. And Patreon's an easy way to do that.
Yeah, and we now have tiers of Patreons. Before and each tier has different, I guess, rewards or benefits to them. And I think one of the benefits for the top tier is a unique B.Friendly shirt that me and Chad are actually working on a design for. So in
I don't
terms of
even know
merch,
about this.
no, you don't know about it. Just because it's your company doesn't mean you get to know everything. You got to keep some
I'll
things
accept that.
secret. Yeah. But yeah, so going back to the merch, we still do have the core collection. Brian will have a limited amount of our games edition shirts, especially the tie-dyes. Tie-dyes were very popular. Maybe that's something we'll bring back. I know we're also working on a Wadapalooza shirt, which is always a fun thing to do. Actually, if you remember this, B.Friendly, the first B.Friendly shirts they made their appearance at Wadapalooza a year ago. So
The second ones.
The second. Yeah, you're right. That was the Miami edition. You're right. All right. Yeah, that's about it. We do have a newsletter, a weekly newsletter. Please sign up for that. Shout out to Teddy Williams for kind of taking that over and doing a great job with that. That the newsletter is just basically a recap of everything that we printed and some messages and also some cool stuff from our sponsors as well, which none of this would be possible without sponsors. And we want to thank those sponsors out there, especially the ones that support us during the games. And yeah, I think, have I missed anything? I think that's it, man.
Nope, I think that's pretty good. And next time that we're on here, I think I'll be in Finland.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, safe travels, Brian, to Finland. I'm sure I'll talk to you probably on the way to the airport or as you're at the airport waiting for your connecting flight or something like that. But again, thanks to all our friends out there for supporting us, coming on. Please like, subscribe to the YouTube channel, download if you want to hear the whole episode and our past episodes. We really appreciate everything you do for us. And as always, be friendly, our friends.